Hello, I am TK Kugler. I am the founder and general managing partner at Wasabi Venture Stallions. And today we are having a kickoff webinar for a new investment opportunity. And a bunch of folks are on the team are going to talk to you about this opportunity. But this is something very different than what we've done. For many of you, you're very familiar with some of our thoroughbred offerings and some of our thoroughbred breeding offerings and our annual funds. This one is something completely different, and we'll talk about that. But it's about Euro sport horse leasing and the management thereof. And Jeff, you want to skip to next slide for me?
Yeah,
Um, I do want to make sure you understand that this is, like all of our Wasabi Venture Stallions offerings, an investment vehicle. It is it's meant to be an investment. So I want you to have your investment hat on. As always, we offer a ton of education, a ton of sort of interesting data along the way as the investments are happening, especially with sort of fun topics like this. But you have to think of this as an investment, and like any investment in this asset class, there is great risk. There is a risk that it doesn't work. We think there's a great chance that it does work, and we'll talk about some of that, but there is always risk, and it is truly an investment vehicle that we're talking about today. With that, I will pass the baton over to Jeff Musgrove, who's going to kind of lead the show from here forward.
absolutely. Thank you, TK. And in a minute, you'll meet the secret weapon, Alice Bowman, as I walk through this. So, thanks everybody for joining. This, as TK mentioned, this is a different feel, right? So, this is us jumping over to the equestrian side and equestrian show jumping. This is a topic near and dear to both Alice and I. We are both parents of equestrians. My daughter is 19 years into this. So when Alice and I talk to you about this, we're talking to you about it not only in terms of the understanding of the opportunity to move into leasing show jumping horses, but we have both experienced being lessees of horses, which is why we see such an amazing opportunity here. And it's a unique opportunity to get into leasing in Europe. And as you will find out in a couple minutes, it's a absolutely unique opportunity for us to be able to partner with someone like Alice Bowman on this. So opportunity, equestrian side, show jumping, pony leasing. So I'm going to go right off the bat and show you the business model that we think makes this so compelling. And it also, as I step you through it, as TK mentioned, there's always risks in investments, but this is a place where we pass off as much of the risk as we can to the lessee. So really the advantage in this equation is being us and being the lessor of the pony. So just to understand how favorable the lease terms are to the lessor. So generally you're doing a 1 year lease. So 1/3 of the value of that horse is charged for a 1 year lease, and it is paid completely upfront at the beginning of the lease. So that full year payable right away. From the moment that lease occurs, starting that day, as soon as they sign, they pay you 1/3 of the full value of the horse. And then from that moment forward, they carry all ongoing expenses of that horse for that year. So you've gotten paid, you've transferred the cost. On top of that, they are also, the lessee also has to carry insurance on the horse to further protect you inside of that lease. So now we've been paid up front. They own every bill, vet, board, every bill, feed, everything you can imagine. They own that. They have to cover insurance. And then we also build in outs of the lease for poor rider performance. And Alice is going to talk a lot about the criteria and the pony rating system a little bit later. But you have outs built in for things like poor rider performance and sales opportunity. So now I'm going to turn it over to our partner, Alice. She'll talk a little bit about herself, but what she's really going to do is take you guys into why leasing and why Europe. Alice?
Hi. So my expertise started after graduating from university. I started in the horse racing industry, and we set up a publication called ANZ Bloodstock News, which was a daily publication based in Australia, similar to the TDN in the US. That was purchased by the Racing Post 10 years after we launched. And after that, I did a couple of years consultancy to them. But during that time, my daughter started show jumping, and I really enjoyed the sport. Obviously, I had a huge amount of experience in the racing industry. My husband's a bloodstock agent, and I was very much involved with him and helping him, run his bloodstock agency. And during that time, my daughter was jumping, and I started employing the principles we were using in the bloodstock agency to buying and selling of show jumping ponies, which is in Europe predominantly very much a leisure sport. Obviously, people do trade and do well, but they tend to do it at the bottom end of the market. And we, focused on buying ponies at the top end and look to trade them, after owning them for a year, 2, 3 max years. And during that time, I built up a large amount of contacts, both in the UK, Ireland, and then we've had success buying out of Scandinavia and across Europe. So why do people lease? I suppose there are a huge amount of reasons why people lease. Often it's a kind of, to sum it up, a pay to play. Leasing is fundamentally cheaper and also a far more straightforward transaction than buying a pony outright. It's got a finite period on it. You know exactly how much you're going to pay for the year, or max 2. And one of the things, especially in Europe, is children have a very limited time on each size of pony, which means that you need to acquire a pony for a maximum of 1, maybe 2 years, and then trade them. And leasing provides families with the opportunity of being able to compete without the hassle of buying and selling, and also, quite importantly, capital commitment. The other thing we've found is the majority of families in this space know very little about investing in horses and ponies. To put it bluntly, they don't understand the horse business. And we found that leasing offers them a very easy way for them to compete in these classes. Families who literally want their children to compete at the top level think that leasing's a very easy option for them to be able to do that. They understand exactly what they're getting. And it's a year, they know what they're going to pay. And at the end of that, they can either renew the lease, whereas often they don't. They need to then go and find the next one. There are also cases where families who love the sport but perhaps can't afford to buy the pony outright, but can afford a lease, which at the end of the day is cheaper than buying the pony outright. At the end of the day, we've found that there are a lot of people who simply want to be able to compete at the major championships around Europe. And if you've got the pony that they want to lease it. And equally, there is a strong market to buy them as well.
Yeah, Alice, you bring up a really good point. And for the folks here not as familiar with leasing, two things to think about is we're talking about, and Alice will get a little more into this, but just to frame it at the highest level, you're dealing with a junior aged rider. So two things to know is the first one's obvious, right? The junior aged rider is growing, right? They're still in a growing period. So you have one part where the rider is growing, and then, as Alice will talk about a little bit later, ponies have a maximum height that they jump and are rated at. So what you really get is the combination of the fact that your kid's growing, their skill is improving, so they need a horse that's bigger, that can jump higher, which is again what Alice is bringing about the beauty in that scenario of leasing the horse for the year, because it allows you to get the horse, and then it allows your child to compete on that horse, gain experience, and then you're able to move on to the next horse, as Alice mentioned. So what is our vision? So our vision is we will go out and acquire top class show jumping ponies, as Alice alluded to. At the same time, Alice is building a network of riders who are looking to lease. So think of it as two pipelines being built. We have horses, and then we have the riders. So we have two pipelines. We find the pony, we match it to the rider, create the lease, and then during that year, the ponies are competing with the leasee. And then at the end of, we'll lease it for 3 years, and then we'll have the opportunity to sell it. And keep in mind, the advantage on the back end is that pony's rating is increasing for all of those 3 years. So what you bought it at and what you can sell it at is an uptick on the sale, because you've increased that pony's value in rating during those 3 years. So Alice is going to take us now through a very, very real personal example of this.
So when my daughter was 9, she showed some ability in show jumping, and I was probably slightly more competitive than she was at that stage. And I started looking at ponies, and I found a pony called My Little Liesel, who was probably too much pony for my daughter. And when we bought her, she was one of the most expensive ponies, 128 ponies traded that year. I spoke to my husband about it, who thought I was absolutely mad when I kind of outlined what I wanted to spend on her. But the more we talked about it and the more we looked at it, he kind of ran with it. That pony did so much for my daughter. It took her, she'd had her for 6 weeks before she qualified for Horse of the Year show, which is one of the big shows to qualify for in the UK. She took her to every major championship. She won so many classes on her. She got her jumping. Every team and every home pony she was selected to ride for England on. We had the most amount of fun with her over 3 years. My daughter was very young when I bought the pony, and then my middle son had 2 years on her. Again, took him to Hoyes, took him to Hickstead, got him selected to ride for England. And at the end of it, I actually, the horse lover in me, I I almost couldn't face selling her. She'd given everything to our family. And I put it out there that I might lease her. And I didn't quite understand the interest I would get in her. It was almost, I could command almost what I wanted. I'd turned down some big offers over the years for her, but that was when my children still needed her. Or, you know, they didn't necessarily need her, but they were still able to ride her. And, you know, at the end of the day, I bought her for my children, not necessarily to make, you know, she was never bought to make money on. She was bought to kind of, the hope was that we would hold the value of her, maybe make a bit when we came to sell her. But when she was offered for lease, I was inundated with offers. We actually leased her out for in the first year, or the first 2 years for, you know, 40% of what she cost. And I get inquiries year round for her. So she was leased to a friend of mine for 2 years in Ireland. Then she came back to the UK in 2025, was leased out, took the little girl, who again was very inexperienced, to Hoy's. The family had the most amazing day out. They had got a box, invited all their friends and family, had the most amazing experience, and would, you know, would pay for that all over again. Then again, from June, July last year, I had people hounding me to lease her out. We were very selective in the family I was able to lease her to. And I actually got 2 inquiries about her last week to see what was happening with her next year. So we've owned her now for 9 years. My kids had her for 5 of that, and the last 4 she's been leased out for. And I'd say we'd lease her out for another 2 to 3 years at least.
Absolutely. And then you have the resale value on the back end when and if you
Yep.
ever do the exit, which is what we'll talk about on the upside. So now I'll also take you a little bit about what a unique opportunity it is with her and in Europe specifically.
So in Europe, one thing I've found is there are no competitors to this currently. There's no structured leasing business in Europe for top ponies. The market is huge over here. At the end of the day, Europe's the global center of sport, horse and pony breeding. And the pony circuit in Europe is extremely competitive. There are competitions in the UK, Ireland, across Europe, Scandinavia, for ponies, and people travel all over Europe to compete their ponies. And equally, one thing we've found is people go all over Europe to try and buy these ponies. Competitions attract, you know, there'll be competitions in Scandinavia that attract people from Ireland. They'll drive across England and Europe to get to these competitions. And at the end of the day, it's extremely fierce. And the circuit, the pony circuit, has produced some of the best young riders in the world. And this demand for ponies is extremely strong in this area.
Great. Thank you so much. So this is what we refer to as a prototype fund. So what we're doing is putting together essentially a 4-year fund and a 4-year plan. So we start off by purchasing 4 to 5 top class show jumping ponies. We will then lease them out. So you're talking about roughly $410,000 in expense for the horses. You're going to gain $137,000 a year in lease revenue. As we mentioned, the ponies will compete. They will get better. Their rating will get better. Their asset value goes up. And then after the 3 years, we will exit all the horses by selling them in year 4. And what you're essentially getting is every penny of the sale after you've leased it for the 3 years is gross profit. So there's where the opportunity is. You're covering yourself during the course of lease, recouping the initial purchase price, increasing the value of the horse, setting yourself up for the exit. So if you thought about this from a P&L perspective, this is the view. So you've got the purchase up front, right? Year one is obviously the year where you spend the money. But you'll see that as you go into year two and year three, and then especially in year four on the exit, the profitability level. And the reason the net earnings are so high is you see the total operating expenses. And there's two things that really drive that. One is what we said, which is when you're in the lease, you're transferring all the costs to the leasee. So there's the first thing to know. You're protected there. So that's risk management at its best from an investor standpoint. So, you've got the piece where you have that protection against some of your operating expenses. And the other one is as Alice mentioned, there's so much supply and demand that our plan is to have the ability to have the rider who's going to lease identified at the time we purchase the horse. So in addition to that, you get right to revenue with little to no carry cost. So you can see, if done correctly, just how profitable this business looks on a 4-year basis. So Alice is now going to talk a little bit about what are the horses that we are looking to acquire and why they make sense, and then a little bit about the pony rating system we've been talking about.
So as I touched on earlier, the value of the show jumping ponies remains relatively consistent. It's not like a racehorse or potential other assets. The value of them, regardless of performance, remains relatively stable until the age of 16. So my plan would be, you've got to be purchasing ponies between the age of 8 and 11, with obviously then the holding period after that. The pony has to be bought right, with looking at ponies that are slightly undervalued, which is where you get your upside. These ponies have got to have a consistent jumping record at the level they need to be performing at. So for a 1-8 pony, the pony needs to be jumping at least at 110 centimeters and have a very consistent record, ideally with multiple riders, which to me shows that the pony's easy and can transfer to another rider without issue. Ponies that have only performed for one child worry me. Ideally, the pony would not have been widely marketed for sale with a price publicized, which means you can control the value. You always want people to think you've paid more for a pony than you have. And the pony would need to pass a full 5-stage vetting, clean x-rays, and also have no break in competition record, history of injury. We've successfully bought and sold ponies that meet this criteria. And as I touched on earlier, I feel that by rating these ponies and knowing the classes, the different countries, having contacts within all of those, our experience in trading thoroughbreds has in part led to success in trading ponies, with us applying those trading principles that we've learned with thoroughbreds into ponies, which is essentially a hobby sport for the majority of people who don't look at it with trading eyes.
So we had a question from someone, and I think it is a very good question, and I think very enlightening. It was enlightening for me, who did not come from this world, when I learned all about this. So, and this is probably a question for you, Alice, which is, most of the people on this call are very knowledgeable about sort of the thoroughbred world, and
Yep.
and have experience as on both the breeding and racing side. And and this question comes from Amy K. In the thoroughbred world, 99% of the time, the value of a horse goes down after it's been utilized, and think of it as a racehorse. 4 years later, 99.99% of them go down in value. They don't go up. Why? So first of all, you're telling me often in this particular space, the value goes up. And then the second question would be, if that is true, why does the price go up in that time period?
Because there aren't nearly enough ponies that can compete at the top level. You've got to be finding the unlike thoroughbreds, where the foal crop is huge, they're produced each year, you get foal sales, yearling sales. There just aren't the ponies being produced. The numbers just don't equate. So when you get a good one, they're hard to find, and people value a good, consistent pony.
Yep.
And I think it transitions into this pony rating too, because the other thing is like a lot of things, right? The asset itself is getting a higher rating, which naturally increases the value.
Yep. And I think another thing, just from sort of what I learned, and you mentioned this, their period of utility is much longer too, compared to a thoroughbred horse, which the modern one you might get 2.5 years if you're lucky of racing, and this is much more of like an 8-year window than a 2-year window. Okay.
So they're still considered babies when they're 7 in show jumpers. They're still, so a show jumper who's 6 and 7, they're still called the young horse classes. They don't really reach maturity until 8, 9. Then a 4-year-old would be like a foal almost. They're not competed. It's just very and their competitive life is so much longer. So Liesel we bought when she was 10. She's 19 now, and I would say she'd have 3 or 4 more years still left in her.
Yeah. And for the people on the thoroughbred side, right? They don't train like thoroughbreds do, meaning every day at that level of pressure on the legs. And the competitions are also limited in how many jumps you're doing. So you end up with a horse that does not have nearly the workload on a day-to-day basis as a thoroughbred, which obviously helps prolong.
And one of the things in the lease contract as well is the limit on how many
Correct.
times you can jump it.
That's right. So again, all natural protections built into the lease.
For both the asset and the animal.
Yeah.
So which is important.
So, one thing, speaking to a vet, a show jumper isn't ever pushed. So a thoroughbred, every time it races, it's pushed to the limit.
Correct.
A show jumper isn't. They obviously need a cool down, but you're not putting a gun to their head every time they go in the ring. It's more like going for a stroll as opposed to a race.
Absolutely. Okay, so what we love about this is the chance to partner with Alice and the chance to build a European-based business. So what does the entity structure look like overall? So Eurosport Horse Leasing and Management is a Irish entity. And then underneath it, we have the Wasabi Special Purpose Vehicle LLC, which we're talking to you about today. And that's where you would invest. US-based investors would invest into the Wasabi SPV. And then Alice will be the other owner and investor in the Irish entity. And then the SPV snapshot. So as I mentioned, we're going to run this as a 4-year fund. You saw kind of the 4-year vision, the 4-year plan. We're raising $385,000. At the same time, because we are running the fund the way we're running it, we are capping the management fee at 25%. I'm sorry, $25,000. And then we built in the standard 20% performance fee you would see inside the fund, $10,000 minimum, $100,000 maximum. We talked about the strategy a lot. So it's all about the right ponies in Europe The asset mix, what we're getting here is the horses that can jump the different heights, right? So what you do is you mix the portfolio, which then gives you access to the really, really good younger riders who you then can follow from 128 centimeters to 138 centimeters to 148. So the idea is get the rider early and have them continuously relying on you for the leasing. So you met Alice. You most likely know a lot about the Wasabi team. Come from the venture capital side. So we've done 70 plus funds. We've raised over $300 million in total. We have deep expertise in investing and also deep expertise on the horse world. We know what a startup looks like. We know what makes it successful, and we know how to make the exit. We talked a little bit about the fact that we're not just talking to you about, the opportunity in show jumping. We have firsthand experience, and I have been on the lease E side of this, so I see the opportunity on the leaseor side. And then there's just two more examples here right at the end, just quickly, just to give you more of an idea of how you can lease it and then turn around and sell it right on the investment. So again, you can take a look at these, but these are just two more there. And that is our presentation for tonight. So I will stop sharing and see if there's any more questions.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in a couple of things. For some of you, and I think a couple of you, if you have been a part of Wasabi Ventures Stallions, I have said internally to the team as we were building this out, this particular fund that we're doing, this SPV, this is our force the pass, which was a stallion we stood, and it's still kicking off dividends 5 years later. It's almost a 5x return for those investors who were part of that. But that was our Force the Pass was our prototype. It was quick, simple, $100,000 investment, and it turned into a really great return. This is the same thing happening here. We're building this fund, simple, relatively small, just so we can prove concepts out to both ourselves and to you. And this, I would envision if we see the success we're going to see, you're going to see one of a more traditional fund being raised 18 months from now. And that's kind of what you're looking at here. So for those of you who just got another dividend check on Force the Pass, this is the Force the Pass of Pony, Euro Pony investing. So that's one thing. The second thing is both this recording and all the offering documents will be in the portal tomorrow, and the fund opens for commitments tomorrow too. So if you got questions or whatever, obviously you can ask the team. You could ask now, but you could also obviously ask. We are envisioning having this fund open for the next 60 days, so it's a very small window, unlike the thoroughbred fund, which is a little longer. This is a short window, so if you're sort of interested, you're interested, and that's okay. And if you're not, that's okay too. But we're gonna start this. We're ready to go buy ponies today. So I told Alice a couple days ago, start looking for ponies, is what was the conversation we had. Any last questions? All right. Well, thanks to the Wasabi team. Thanks for Alice for staying up late in Europe to do this. So I appreciate that. It was great, and obviously I'll see all of you online. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.